Well, greetings from Christ the King Episcopal Church in Panama City Beach, Florida, where I am on a Zoom call with the Reverend Deacon Ed Richards, who many of you know is now our vocational deacon here at Christ the King Episcopal Church. And nobody is more excited about this than I am.
Except for maybe me.
Except for maybe Ed. Oh, well, great. Well, Ed has been with us for 2 Sundays now, officially. It was supposed to be yesterday, on November 15th was his start date, and he jumped in a week early because we needed him to. And so I'm grateful for that. So he came out with a bang, with, leading everything, preaching and such. And I thought I would use this time to to allow us to get to know Ed better. So, Ed, before we get into this too much, these questions, how do you like to be addressed? Do people call you Deacon Ed or?
Either one of those is fine. I'm not really big on formalities, so I guess my formal title would be, as you said before, is the Reverend Deacon. And my full name, Edward T. Richards, but Deacon Ed or just Ed are absolutely fine. I don't need, I'm not big on titles, as it were.
Okay. As spoken like a true deacon, right?
Mm.
Tell us about your diaconal ministry up until now. What you've been doing east of us as a deacon in the Episcopal Church.
Well, I was ordained in February of 2011 and was sent to Wewa Hitchka to intern and learn a little bit more about what I was supposed to do with Jerry Huft, who had moved to this diocese from a diocese in Central Florida where they had more deacons. And I was part of the first class of deacons, or the first people ordained as a deacon here. And I there worked with him for doing pastoral care and preaching once a month and doing the prison ministry that I'd already been doing, and sort of ingraining myself or involving myself in the church with the different things that they had going on. In the first Sunday of Advent of 2012, I moved to St. Thomas by the Sea in Laguna Beach, who did not had a permanent supply priest. They didn't have a vicar. And so there I ended up doing a lot of things that you would normally do, or a vicar would normally do. I did all the pastoral care. I did some counseling with folks who wanted to sit and talk with somebody. I assisted the permanent supply priest, Chuck Floyd, when on Sundays. And as time went on, we went from, excuse me, I don't know what's happened. All of a sudden it went away. Something came up on the screen. I couldn't see you. And so I had office hours. The priest did not. I attended vestry meetings. He did not. And so I did probably more than a normal deacon would do as far as a church. And then for the last 3 years, I've worked with Mary Alice Matheson as she tried to, and I tried to work with both the congregation at St. Thomas and at Grace to try to get them to do work together. Because probably neither one of those churches was going to be able to exist if they continue to go on their own. So they have signed a covenant where they are looking for a priest to share and to do some joint ministry work. But Mary Alice's time expired, and therefore so did mine. Because normally when a priest leaves, the deacon at the church leaves as well. Sort of like if you had an associate priest and you left, the associate might stay until through the transition to a new priest, but then would leave. With a deacon, it's pretty much similar to that.
Okay, so then that's a good segue into how do deacons choose which parish they serve?
Well, deacons are assigned. Deacons are really creatures of their bishop. Um, Deacons are not, priests are called to parishes. Parishes do normally go through a search process. They narrow the search down to a few people, one or two people. They interview them. They go and see them, have them come and see the congregation, and then they're called. Deacons do not work that way. The bishop assigns us to a parish. Now, does that mean that I would have, if Bishop Duncan said, or not Duncan, excuse me, Bishop Kendrick said he wanted me to go someplace and I really didn't want to go there, would I have to do that? Probably not. Everything is done, on a cordial basis. But he's assigned me to Christ the King. As Bishop Duncan assigned me to St. Thomas, and then Bishop Kendrick assigned me to add grace into the picture.
Gotcha. Okay. And so are deacons paid a salary or a stipend? I know some folks will say, gosh, how can we afford another staff person in these lean times?
Well, most deacons are non-stipendiary. That does not mean that all of them are. Some even in this diocese are paid, but they have very, very specific duties where they're working to do some other things. I mean, I've got a really good friend who's the chief operating officer of the Diocese of New Jersey, and she is certainly paid in that position.
Mm-hmm.
But for her diaconal work in the church that she's attached to, she's not paid.
Right. Gotcha. So then how do you become a deacon? Like when you felt the call to become a deacon, how do you go to seminary? What do you do?
Well, this also, because deacons are creatures of their bishop, this is very much different from diocese to diocese. But the discernment process is usually pretty much the same as somebody who feels called to priesthood. You go and you talk to the priest at the church where you are currently attending, and talk to them about what you think is a call. Then if they think that that's worthy, they then may set up an appointment. You go and talk with the bishop, who either decides that he thinks that you have a potential call or not, and then you go through discernment. Mm-hmm. Again, discernment changes from diocese to diocese, but I had a discernment committee that I worked with over a number of weeks, made up of people. I was attending Holy Nativity at the time, but made up of people from the 8 o'clock service, and I usually went to the 10:30 service. So they weren't people that I knew well. Mm-hmm. I knew them, and they knew of me, but we didn't know each other well. And they helped me really to flesh out what my call was. I also had to see a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a physician, go before the Commission on Ministry and the Standing Committee, all to be approved to go to the diocesan school for deacons, which doesn't exist anymore, but had just been created. That started with a spring semester, and we took classes, and we went every other week initially to Gulf Breeze and then to Pensacola. In the first summer, we didn't have classes, but we had to do a CPE type experience. Everybody was basically working, so you couldn't just go off and be at a hospital for the summer and ignore your day job. But went to Bay Medical Center and made rounds and called on people. Basically, went in, knocked on doors, or if they needed somebody, I was on call. Go in and talk to people and that sort of thing. And then would meet with Tom Weller once every week to go over what we'd done the week before and do verbatims, which you probably remember from your CPA. which are not the most fun things in the world to do.
CPE being clinical pastoral education.
Correct.
Right.
So then we went back and for the fall and spring semester did more of classwork. Old Testament, New Testament, ethics, theology, preaching, liturgics, as it applied to a deacon, those kinds of things. Some of which are would be very familiar because you took courses like that in seminary.
Mm-hmm.
But they were taught by basically priests in the diocese.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, there were three people who were sort of oversaw the school, and Frank Cooper was one of them, and he basically made sure that we did everything properly according to canon.
Mm-hmm.
Then the second summer, everybody had to do a project that hopefully would last and for the church that they were currently going to or for another group of people. That summer, I created a food pantry at Holy Nativity because of where they live, where they are in a residential area. We didn't think that having a food bank where people would come and pick up food would be good, but if a pantry that would then they'd collect food from the parishioners and other folks, other churches in the area, and then distribute it to places like Catholic Charities, Salvation Army, Family Service Agency,
Mm-hmm.
who would then, come and pick it up and give it out to people. Amazingly, that still exists and is going strong at Holy Nativity now, which sort of makes me feel good.
Yeah, yeah. So share with the people of Christ the King who your classmate was in the diaconal school.
Yeah, my classmate, who many people at Christ the King know or know of, was Bobby D. We rode together back and forth to Pensacola and well, gosh knows, I don't know how many weekends, but for an awful lot of them, and got to be really good friends.
Well, he was thrilled to hear that you are coming to join us here at Christ the King. And so he and Pat are in Montgomery now.
Mm-hmm.
But, it's cool that one class is now giving Christ the King 2 deacons. So in this sense, you're kind of almost like a mercenary clergy person, right? I mean, you essentially and technically report to the bishop, right?
Technically, I do report to the bishop, and the bishop really controls where I'm going to do my ministry, to a large extent. I mean, you and I know, because we both have been working on getting me to Christ the King for a number of years, and the bishop wasn't ready to assign me there yet. But eventually, he saw our logic, and so he assigned me there. But while I'm at Christ the King, I'll work closely with you to carry out what needs to be done at Christ the King. And I'm not at Christ the King to report back to the bishop every little thing that happens at Christ the King, good, bad, or indifferent. That's between me and you, not the bishop.
Right.
Some priests don't want deacons because they're afraid that the deacon's going to go rat on to the bishop on them. So.
Well, so some folks who have been with us on Sundays the past 2 weeks or watched from the live stream could see you, liturgically speaking. What are the liturgical roles of a deacon that are typical?
Well, typically, it's what I did this Sunday. Typically is to read the gospel, lead the Nicene Creed, bid the confession. In some cases, bid the prayers to the people. In other cases, not. That sort of depends on what how the priest wants to do the service, and if you have lay people who are used to doing that, then by all means continue. Preach occasionally. I think maybe once a month. Sometimes more, sometimes less. When I was at St. Thomas with Chuck Floyd, it got towards the end of that period of time, I was preaching every other week. But I wouldn't expect to do that at most churches. But an occasional time in the pulpit, and deacons are supposedly have a prophetic voice, so my sermons may be a little bit different than your sermons.
Mm-hmm.
Because part of what a deacon does is to keep one foot in the church and one foot in the world.
Mm-hmm.
But then to set the table and help distribute the elements to the congregation, depending on, again, on the congregation, that could be either dispensing bread, distributing the bread, or wine, depending on what the congregation needs. If you normally have chalice bearers and they would do the wine, and you and I would share the bread as we're doing now in COVID times.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last thing would be to do the dismissal. Because there are three things that a deacon cannot do that a priest can do. They're the ABCs. I cannot pronounce absolution. I cannot give a blessing. Like if in a wedding ceremony, I can't bless. If I can do it, I can conduct a wedding, but I can't bless the rings, or the couple at the end. And I cannot consecrate. I cannot consecrate sacrament.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So when I stepped in for you 2 weeks ago, and we had communion anyway, we did a deacon's mass and used reserved sacrament that had already been consecrated by you.
Yeah. Good. So, and then you tell us where to go, right? At the end.
Yes.
So why do you think let me ask you this. Why do you think that they have typically had a deacon read the gospel lesson and a deacon do the dismissal? How does that connect with the vocational call of the diaconate, do you think?
Well, it's to take the gospel to the world. So reading the gospel is taking the gospel to the congregation. The dismissal is to send the people out into the world to take the gospel and to take the gospel with them.
Right. Yep. So, and you're also, I think, a living, breathing, sacramental sign of the gospel that has been carried out into the world.
Mm-hmm.
That's why deacons will oftentimes carry the gospel book, in procession.
Right.
In some churches, but regardless of whether you do that or not, reading the gospel and actually, the other piece is, why do we process the gospel? Why don't we just read it from the lectern like the other lessons? And Ed, you want to take a stab at that?
Well, yeah, that's because you're taking it out to the congregation. You're taking it to the people. You're taking the gospel to the people, whether it's me or you. We take the gospel to the people.
Right.
And truly in a lot of churches, and like at most diocesan events, the deacon of the table or the gospeler will carry the gospel book in, place it on the altar, then pick it up and take it out to the congregation, read it, and then bring it back, put it back behind the altar, and then carry it out at the end of the service.
Mm-hmm.
That also depends on how many folks you have.
Right. Well, tell me this. So that kind of covers how you'll be functioning with us on Sundays.
Mm-hmm.
What about during the week? And let's just pretend like we're not in COVID, right? Because COVID is like the eternal asterisk,
Yes.
You have the asterisk except during COVID or whatever. But,
Mm-hmm.
Typically no COVID. What might a week look like for you as it relates to us here?
Well, a good part of what I'll do is work with you and members of the congregation on pastoral care, visiting or calling people who are shut in. One of the things I think that we've discussed that we'd like to see happen is not only you and I being able to take communion to people at home, but to get a group of people from the parish, because it's a very meaningful ministry, which probably is one of the things that led me to become interested in being a deacon I was a lay Eucharistic visitor before that, was taking communion to people in nursing homes and at home when they were sick, when I was at St. Andrews and then at Holy Nativity.
Right. Yeah, well, good.
Also be involved with the various outreach ministries of the parish, and of course continue to do what is my primary diaconal ministry, which is prison ministry.
Good. That's where I
Primarily
was gonna
through,
go next.
huh?
That's where I was going to go next. I wanted you to share with us that. The
Well, I've
prison.
been doing a prison ministry called Kairos, which for those people who have been to Cursillo or know about Cursillo, is basically modeled on the Cursillo method, changed a bit because of where the pilgrims are,
Mhm.
so that they can't necessarily do all the things that people would do on the outside. But it's basically a 4-day weekend. But then you continue with weekly prayer and share groups, and also with what we would call, in the Cursillo movement, Ultreas, but they are called monthly reunions. So we go back. The folks in prison like to say we're one of the few prison ministries where they continually see us. A lot of people that do prison ministry, they go in, they do a big bang up like revival, and they go away, and they might come back in 2 or 3 years, but they don't see them in between.
Mhm.
We go in, we do a weekend, and then we're there every month
Mhm.
on a Saturday morning. I have done in the past something called prison visitation and support. There was a federal prison and work camp in Mariana, and I went up there and worked there with it, and it was basically open to people. The Federal Bureau of Prisons has discovered that people who while they're incarcerated get visits, whether from family, friends, or people they don't even know, do better in prison and do better when they go back into the world than if you don't. And so prison visitation support basically enlisted volunteers who would go and do that. Unfortunately, Hurricane Michael blew the fences down and the roof off the federal prison in Mariana. And although they have said that they are going to rebuild, they haven't yet. So that has come to an end. But while I was up there, and then I've also done some, I was conducting once a month an Episcopal service, both in the women's work camp and at the main prison. And then I've done preached at the normal Sunday service at the Northwest Florida Reception Center. But again, that has changed with COVID and with other things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I may be able to start that again. I may not. Part of the thing is their service begins at 11, so I'd have to finish up our service and run.
Yeah.
Or if we go back post COVID,
right.
the Sunday the Sunday that I'm going to preach there, I could do the 8:00 service,
right,
and
right.
run back, and then make the prison easily.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, Ed, correct me if I'm wrong, isn't that how you and I initially connected, was through my interest in prison ministry?
Yes.
Yeah. So Ed's come.
Well, actually, yeah, it is, but also you may recall that I was the deacon at the table for your ceremony of celebration of a new ministry.
That's right. That's right. That's right. So yeah, Ed was in a sense there from the get-go with me, and he and I have developed a close working relationship on the prison ministry commission. I've done Kairos with Ed. I'm taking a sabbatical from that now that I have 2 little kids, and because of the Saturday commitment with Kairos. But yeah, he's been with us from the get-go, and Ed and I have been close colleagues and friends, aside from our working relationship. So, as I said earlier, nobody is more excited than I am about this new relationship. And I know that Ed will be um, working with Tommy Fairweather and Ben Ward with outreach initiatives and such, as well as he kind of indicated. Um, but we'll just kind of see how it goes in terms of, I think slow and steady wins the race. Because if I'm not careful, I could just dump a lot on your plate, and we could too, and that's an exciting thing because there's so much opportunity and fertile ground for ministry here at Christ the King and at Santa Rosa Beach.
That's why I'm so excited that Christ the King is already doing so much.
Right.
That just to be able to be involved and with a parish that's really looking beyond its doors, and that is really looks to the world to take the gospel message to the world.
We're going to be participating next spring in a spring break initiative with the diocese. John Talbert, a new deacon, transitional deacon, is applied for an evangelism grant that will be connecting with spring breakers who come to the beach and giving them water and having a sort of hydration tent, for the beach goers on spring break, and pastoral care tent, hydration, etc. So I'm excited about that. And
yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah. Tell me about your family, Ed.
Well, Gail is who you know as my wife, is really my second wife, and we're about to celebrate our 10-month anniversary.
Hallelujah.
We decided at our age that we would count months instead of years.
Right.
Because we may not have that many years, but we'll have a lot of months.
Yeah. Well, what a way to start a marriage in the middle of a global pandemic.
Well, we started just before we got married in January. So
okay.
But just before we recognized that we were in a global pandemic.
Right.
I mean, the pandemic had started, but we didn't know it yet.
Well, you got to know each other pretty well in your first year of marriage.
Well, we had also spent a lot of time together over a whole bunch of years. Her first husband died, and I knew them, and we worked together at Supper at Grace with the crew from Holy Nativity that worked there. And she and I had been on the Homeless and Hunger Coalition board together in Panama City. She was actually on my discernment committee.
Oh, wow.
So we had known each other a lot, and we sort of semi-tested our relationship after Hurricane Michael, because after 3 days, she had power and water. It was 3 weeks before I had power and water at my house. So I moved into her guest room.
Yeah.
The biggest problem was the elevator didn't always work, and she was on the 5th floor. And then just about the time I got power and water, she got internet, and I still didn't have. It took another 3 weeks before I got internet. So it was an interesting time, but it sort of tested our relationship. Is can we live together without killing each other?
Well, that's setting the bar pretty high there, Ed. I guess.
But so we have a blended family. Gail has a son, my stepson, Ryan, who lives in Roswell, Georgia. And I have 4 children. My oldest son is Ted. He and his wife Heather and their daughter Kari live in East Lansing, Michigan, where they are both professors at the Michigan State University. My oldest daughter Jan lives with her husband and 2 children, Ella and Campbell, in Ellington, Connecticut, and she has a stepson, her husband's son by a first marriage, Dylan, who has grown and lives someplace in Colorado, but I'm not really sure where. And then I have a son, Nathan, who lives in Chattanooga, not married. And then I have a daughter, Tracy, who lives in Broomfield, Colorado, which is outside of Denver, about halfway between Denver and Boulder. And she is married, her husband Will, and they have two little boys, actually smaller than your two,
Oh, wow.
William and James.
Okay.
And I've seen James in pictures, but I've yet to go and be able to hold him because James was born during COVID times.
Oh, right.
So traveling is just not something that I'm prepared to do. And going out there from Florida's a hot spot,
Right.
or has been for a lot longer than Colorado is. The whole country seems to be now.
Right.
But I have to go out there and quarantine for 2 weeks before I would go see them. And that
That's
doesn't work real well. That's
right.
not good on the budget.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
um,
what brings you joy or enjoyment besides your family, which it clearly does, but um,
well, there are a number of things, but so other than my diaconal ministry, I'm retired. So um, I've always liked to cook. And now that I'm married, I'm finding I'm cooking a whole lot more. I basically cook most of the meals. I'm finding that that I'm doing things that I never thought I could do, like making quiche and pesto and stuff like that, and really enjoying it very, very much.
oh, that's
About 3 years ago, I was very, very heavy and I needed to do something. And so I adopted a dog from Aliquid. And so we go on a lot of walks together, getting about 10,000 steps a day, which has helped my waistline tremendously. And so that's a lot of fun. I really get enjoyment from her. I enjoy reading a great deal, and usually read a book or two, a book a week, or maybe some, depending on the book, might be 2 weeks.
Mhm.
Both fiction and nonfiction, primarily stuff that read a lot of stuff about Black Lives Matter in the last year, in particular, and that sort of stuff. But so those are the primary things, and of course, spending time with Gail.
Yeah.
That's just, that's. I was single for almost 20 years, so
You
that.
got a new wife and a new church, Ed. Things are looking good for
Yeah,
you.
they are. They are. I'm really, like I said, um, I may actually be more excited than you.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's awesome. That's
yeah.
a recipe for um, a lot of good, healthy gospel work. That,
Mhm.
as you heard me say in my sermon yesterday, I'm actually having fun. I mean, this is a heck of a year, and I want to say that sensitively because for some people, it's not been a fun year, financially,
Right.
health-wise, whatever, anxiety, and I feel that too. But I really just love the church in general, and I'm just still a long time deep believer in the church itself and in the Episcopal Church and what we have to offer in God's kingdom. It's unique. It's not for everybody, but I couldn't be more in love with the Episcopal Church or with Christ the King. I just love where I am. And having you here alongside me and us will just make it that much more joyful and meaningful and productive. And so I
Yeah.
can't wait it's already paid off last Sunday. But so I'm just so glad to have you and Gail with us. And so for
No,
those of y'all who are, what's that?
we're both happy to be there. We
Yeah.
really are. Um,
So for
so
those of y'all watching this interview, now that you know Ed a little bit better, come introduce yourself and talk to him about some of the things that he's mentioned to see if you would like to get involved, whether it's prison ministry, um, um, food ministry, and even if it's stuff that he's not directly involved with, because he doesn't have time, he can link you up with someone who is involved.
one of the things I'm really interested in doing and looking forward to doing is I know that there's a big network of social service agencies, doing things in South Walton County that I have no idea about. I know Bay County pretty well because one of the things I did before I became a deacon was I worked for the United Way over here for 10 years. And so, I pretty well grounded in the social services in Bay County. But I really don't know that much about South Walton County, and that'll be
I know somebody who
from what I understand. What I understand is Em will be able to plug me in well.
Emily is the social services guru, because when she was doing her ministry as the South Walton Community Chaplain, that's one thing she put together was a binder, and it's like, that thick of every agency in the county, what they do, who to contact. And so she's a wealth of knowledge. And so now she works specifically with caring and sharing, but what she brought to caring and sharing was also the capacity and interest in developing partnerships with the other agencies, so they weren't competing or ignoring one another, but actually, well, we can't help here, but I know who can, type stuff. So
yes, and that's a really good thing. That was not really the case that much in Pensacola or in Bay County, Escambia County or Bay County. But what happened in both those counties is they were both hit, Pensacola very hard with Hurricane Ivan. And at that point in time, they had to learn that they couldn't do everything on their own. And they also needed help from the outside, but they all started working together and have continued to do so. They were still pretty parochial in Bay County until Hurricane Michael. And then once again, it was just way more than anybody could deal with on their own. And there were lots of people that came in from the outside, thank goodness, to help. But to work together, you can accomplish so much more than you can on your own.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think this wraps up our interview. I mean, there's so much more we could talk about, and maybe we could do one in a few months to update folks on what's been going on. But I just wanted to use this as an opportunity to let y'all get to know Ed a little bit better. And he's also typed out some much shorter hand version of the answers to these questions that we'll make available in our weekly newsletter or our website, so that you can sort of read a shorter version of these answers, so you can learn not just about Ed, but about the diaconate in general. Is what are deacons in the Episcopal Church, and how can they help us all? And so, Ed, thank you so much. Would you like to give us a dismissal?
Sure. Go in peace to love and serve the Lord. Hallelujah, hallelujah.
Thanks be to God. Hallelujah, hallelujah.
God bless.